attack me, or they would feel that I was possessed or something, and they'd be beating on me, getting the devil out of me and things like that, and it scared me. And I realized at one point that they had, all the other religions I went to had only one thing in common, and that was their hatred for Catholics. And I thought, you know what? I've never heard that kind of hatred from the Catholic Church, so it must be the only true church. Because Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged. The weight you measure out is the weight you get. And I never found that in the Catholic Church in all the years I was alive. And so I went back to the church. But I didn't go right away. I was working in show business in Los Angeles, and I was on my way to, I don't know where, no, it wasn't Los Angeles, I was in Carmel, California. And they had a number of real beautiful old missions. And I was on my way to a show that we were doing, and I, all of a sudden, passing by this beautiful old, mission church. And the doors kind of propped open a little bit, and I thought, I wonder, I'm going to stop in. Why not? It has been a long time. Don't even remember how long. And I walked in, and I could smell the church. Catholic churches should smell like incense, just so you know. If they don't smell like incense, turn around and walk out. It's probably not a Catholic church. But every time I walked into that church, I could smell the incense, you could smell the candles, and there up on the right side, there's this beautiful statue of the Blessed Mother with real hair. Freakish, but hey. Anyway, so I'm looking at this, and I start walking up, and as I'm getting closer to the front, I feel this fervor starting up, and this fervor start building inside of me, and I'm thinking, oh man, it's been, I don't know how long it's been, years since I've been to confession. I gotta find a priest, So I'm there looking at this statue, there's candles all over the place, flowers all over. And so I see this sign, the sanctuary is over here, and I see this sign on this door with a glass on it, and it says, for priest, ring bell once. And it had big ones with underlines and exclamation points. And so I went over there, and I thought, okay, I need to be a priest, that's it. And so you know how, there's nobody in the church, right? And so you know how when you ring a bell, you can hear it? Nothing. Couldn't hear a thing. And I'm thinking, maybe I didn't push it hard enough. And I pushed it harder. Nothing. Maybe it's broken. So I twist it, push, twist it the other way, push. And finally, all of a sudden, I hear this voice, hold your horses! Okay, so here comes this door. You can see the glass, somebody coming about that big. And he comes, all of a sudden the door opens up, and there's this little tiny, hobbled over old priest, at least 130 years old. And he's carrying a cane, and he's looking at me, what do you want? I said, Father, I'd like to go to confession if I could. Oh, the confessionals are in the back of the church. And then he starts walking, and I said, whoa, Father, why don't we just sit right down here? I figured he'd drop dead by the time he got back there, and I really didn't have that time. So I sat with him right there on the altar, and every time I would tell my sins, right? And I started with the worst sins. I looked at him and I said, first of all, I made a sign of the cross. And I said, Father, I said, I am completely and totally ashamed. I said, but I'm going to start with the worst sin. And I've committed this sin, and I've got to be honest with you. What I did was, you think I'm going to tell you people? I see you sitting there going, I am not going to tell you my sin. All I can tell you is this, that during the entire confession, that's all he kept saying was, oh, the mercy of God. Oh, the mercy of God. Oh, God's mercy. Well, after he gave me my 187 rosaries for penance, I looked at him and I said, Father, why is there the statue here, all flowers and candles? He says, you don't know what feast day it is today? I said, Father, after what I confessed to you, you're lucky I'm even here. He says, today's the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So, oh, wow, that's great. So you know what I did? I went to confession, and then after that confession, I went to Mass every single day. I was at that church. I went to one church, another church, And I was so filled with fire that even the show business world kind of figured I was headed for monkdom. And I went every single day to confession until the second week. And then I was in, I think it was a gathering or a cast party. And somebody said, "So how was Mass today, Catholic boy?" And I said, "Mass today? Why would I have to? Today's Sunday." He says, "You mean you didn't go to Mass? It's Sunday. You're going to go to hell." I said, "Oh my gosh, it's a mortal sin not to go to Mass on Sunday." Well, I'm going to have to go to confession, but you know, I should probably collect a few more sins to make it worth his while. So I didn't go back. I collected more sins, and I didn't go to church. I enjoyed sinning again. And so I don't know how long it was, months and months later, I'm walking in Los Angeles, and I'm at, actually it's Sunset Boulevard. And on the Sunset, there's this Catholic church that's got about 70 stairs going up to the top of it. Big, beautiful old church. And I hear song and music, and the windows are open. It's a warm, beautiful day. And so I said, well, why not? I may as well go up the stairs. So I climbed up the stairs, and I went in, and here's a statue of the Blessed Mother being carried in the monstrance, and there's candles and people in procession and servers, and there's a choir singing, and there's candles all over the place, and they were in the midst of this great, glorious festival. And there were a couple of the confessionals, and they were fired up and going, and there were red and green lights, and I gathered almost immediately that green meant go, red meant stop. So what I did was I kind of shuffled my way through the crowd, and I stood right next to one of the doors, and not noticing that there were like 75 people in a line. I mean, who looks at lines, you know? I just wanted to go to confession. So I jumped in there as soon as the next person came out. And I went to confession. And much to the chagrin of the people who were waiting in line, but I went to confession, and because that fervor was there, and I'm kneeling in the church, and you know, I'm just filled with fervor and fire. And so much so, I must have really looked like a saint, because somebody came up to me and said, "Who are you?" And it's probably because they knew me from theater, from show business, but they said, "But you're so pious, and you're praying," and I says, I said, "Could you tell me what's going on? I mean, why is there this feast? Why is there this stuff going around here, the Eucharist and all that stuff?" He says, "Oh, today's the feast of the Blessed Mother." I said, "Oh, well, that's pretty good." Well, to make a long story short, this happened the exact same way, where after 2-3 weeks, I stopped going again. The fervor would last for a couple weeks, but then after the fervor died, so did my faith, and I would stop going. And this happened about 14 times. And every single time, the same exact scenario, I would get the fervor would come up, I would run to the confessional, and this is after months of not going. And I would go for a week, maybe a week and a half, and then the fervor would die, and then I would stop going. And every single time it was the feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Now, to show you how stupid I was, never in all the years did I ever connect the dots. It never dawned on me that every single time I walked into a church after not going for months at a time, every single time it was a feast of the Blessed Mother. Every single time, without fail. And it never dawned on me. So until one day, I was in San Francisco. I was on my way to teach at ACT, which is the finest acting school in the world. Never had to take an acting lesson in my life, and I was asked to teach at one of the best universities or schools for acting on the planet. And I was on my way there, and I'm walking down, because I was living up on Beacon Hill, and I was walking, and here I see St. Francis of Assisi Parish. I'm in the city of St. Francis, and here's St. Francis Parish. So I thought, you know what? What better luck? I'm going to go in for good luck. This is my first teaching job, and I was doing a lot of movies and television, a live stage, and you name it. So I walked in. I climbed the stairs, and I walked in. No statue decked out with flowers, and no candles for days. I walked in, but the smell, the smell of a church. Oh, that incense. And I looked over on the left, and there's this little rickety old card table, kind of bowed in the middle, and a little tiny doily on top of it. And on top of that was a statue of a woman, and it was like this. This is what it looked like. There were no hands. No hands. And to top that off, there were black spots all over it, like leopard spots. And I thought, what in heaven's name is that? Is this like the saint of the limbless? Is this like the leopard skin lady or something who was mauled by a lion or something? And so I'm thinking, my curiosity got to me. Although the fervor's still building, mind you. So I'm walking over there looking at this. And as I get closer, I realize that it's the Immaculate Heart of Mary from Fatima. And it's a wooden statue. And I saw that the hands were removed. There were no hands on this statue. And I noticed the black spots were flame marks. And I found out later that someone had taken the statue. They had broken in, the Satanists. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Candlestick Park. Do you know why it's called Candlestick Park? Because the Satanists have on that hill where Candlestick Park is, they have their chants and their sacrifices at night, and you can see them carrying their candles. And that's why it became nicknamed Candlestick Park. So there's a real strong satanic movement in San Francisco. And the Satanists had broken into the church some time back. And they had taken the statue and they had put it from one pew to the other and put all the candles underneath it to try to burn it because it was made out of wood. Well, they couldn't burn it. And so they were so angry, they took the hands, broke the hands, and threw them in the street. And the cars rode over them and it broke them. Well, I didn't know any of this, but I was standing there and it was on a table and it was about this high. About so high from this table. And I was looking at this and the most beautiful face with glass eyes. Beautiful face. And I'm standing there and I'm feeling all this fervor, I've got to find a priest. Go to confession. And I'm looking and all of a sudden, the church was empty. And all of a sudden, somebody in the church, it sounded like somebody in the church said, so you're back again. And I went, and I looked and I went through all of the pews. I opened up all the doors. Nobody. I went everywhere. I even went up in the choir loft. Not a soul. But the windows were open. And I thought, well, maybe somebody must have said that outside and it just echoed into the church. So I worked my way back to the statue because I was so mesmerized by her face. It was so pretty, beautiful. And I looked at the statue, and the last thing I remember hearing was, so you're back again. And so I looked, and I just said, just not even thinking, yep, I'm back again. And all of a sudden, I heard this. If you do as you have done before, I will never call you back again. Instantly I knew, and I remembered every single time I was ever called back in the church, it was the Feast of the Blessed Mother. I knew instantaneously something I'd never known before, never realized before, that every single time that fervor, when that died, I died spiritually. I was living off of the feeling. I was living off of that. And I got scared. So I stayed in the church. I wouldn't leave. Missed my teaching debut. Missed everything. I stayed in the church. I refused to leave the church. Couldn't find a priest. Nobody would answer. There was no bells. And I just stayed there. And then all of a sudden, this little Italian woman came in. Her name was Anna Zumbo. I'll never forget her as long as I live. God bless her. She couldn't speak hardly any English. And when she came in, she started cleaning. And I went up to her and I said, excuse me, but is there anything that I could do? Can I help you in any way? Clean anything? Just let me do something. And she's, Mamma mia, certo, we have all of this stuff over here, we need to be clean. So she took a table just like this, and it was up against this wall. And she covered it with a sheet just like this is. And she introduced me to a can of Brasso. Never seen that stuff before. And 1,000 rags. And she opened up all of the cupboards. And there was all these corroded brown things, silver and gold and you name it. And she said, now this is what you gotta do. You gotta take it like this, and you gotta do it until it's a black. And then you wait a little bit of time until it dries, and then you rub it clean. So okay, let me at it. So here I am, working on these gold candelabras and monstrances and chalices and ciboriums and you name it. Whatever I could find, I was working on it. She went, came back, brought me a sandwich, which was really good because I was really getting hungry. So I was working on there, and then finally she said she had to go home. So I said, okay, God bless you, thank you so much, Anna, and I'm working like crazy. Well, I heard the mass going on, so I turned down, I closed the door and I turned off the lights. There was still light outside. And so I'm still cleaning, but very quietly. Well, the mass ended. There was nobody. I peeked out, nobody in the church. So I just kept cleaning and cleaning. Well, then I was done. I've cleaned every single thing, but I still didn't want to leave the church. Well, I noticed that this was facing the altar. The altar was there, the entrance was over here, and there were doors over there. And I thought, all these doors, I've pulled everything out, but those doors, what's behind there? And so I took the table and I moved it away, and I opened the door, and I got down on my knees and I looked in, and it was underneath the altar. It was all dirt. Well, just before I closed the door, because I thought, oh, it's just it's like a crawl space under the altar. All of a sudden, some glimmer caught my eye. And I looked, and I crawled in, and I started digging where I saw the little sparkle. And all of a sudden, I uncover a monstrance with diamonds and rubies and emeralds in it. And so I'm digging, and I find a chalice, and I find every single thing that was lost in the San Francisco fire. They never found it. The church was burnt to the ground. They rebuilt over it, but never dug through the ashes. And so I'm pulling all this stuff out, and I start cleaning it. And I'm cleaning and cleaning. I got the whole table is packed with stuff. I mean, these things that I found, those were really good stuff. I mean, these were diamonds all over them for days, jewels all over, solid gold things. So here I am, all of a sudden, I hear the door in the back of the church, kaboom! And I looked up at the clock. It's like 11 o'clock or midnight. I don't remember what time it was anymore. But it was late at night. And I went, oh! And I hear the whole church was still wooden. And so I hear his footsteps, whoever it was, walking up toward the front of the church. And I looked and I see a sheet with all of this millions of dollars, what looked like millions of dollars worth of diamonds and jewels. Who's going to believe I'm cleaning it? They're going to think that I'm going to take the sheet and I'm going to run out with it, right? So I thought, what does a thief not do? So all right, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Most loving and affectionate Father, as we come to the conclusion of this full day of retreat, on the day dedicated and consecrated to the Most Blessed Virgin Mary, on this the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, help us to understand our beloved Lord Jesus, to love him with her heart, to serve him with her dedication and devotion. Help us to understand the importance of the Most Blessed Virgin Mary in our lives and the life of the Church. We ask this through the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the Mother of God, the Mother of all who call themselves Christian. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Now let me tell you something about Mary. There is a phrase that is used by some of the great saints in the history of the Church. And St. Thomas Aquinas, to be specific. And he says this about Mary. He said, when God created Mary, now listen to this, this is a theological statement. He exhausted the obediential potency of creaturehood. Now what does that mean? That means that for God, he could not have created any creature, even infinitesimally more perfect than Mary, because he would have had to create another God. And a God cannot be created. So Mary is the pinnacle of creation. Creaturehood could not tolerate any more perfection in one being. And so therefore, Mary exhausted the obediential potency of creaturehood. And now that means that if you took all the beauty of all of creation, of all the galaxies, of all the stars in the sky, of every created thing that has ever existed or ever will exist, all of the virtues compiled in every human being that has ever lived or ever will walk the face of the earth, it would be as a candle to the sun in comparison to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Mary, this is the woman that has been given to us as our mother. Now, Mary is the pinnacle of creation. We know this. And she's the great exemplar of the church, and she teaches us how to love Jesus. Mary is essential. And I will go so far as to say this. It is absolutely impossible to love Mary, to love Jesus, the way he wants to be loved, if you do not go through Mary. She's the only one who can teach us how to love Jesus, the way he should be loved. Who can you find on earth, in all the history of mankind, who loved Jesus more? No one. When God created Mary, he pulled out all the stops. This was his mother. He was going to take his very flesh from her. And so she had to be born without original sin. Why? Because God was going to take his very flesh that would be crucified from her. And he could not take flesh from anyone who had been at any time under the dominion of hell. And original sin is the dominion of hell, the dominion of the devil. And so Mary had to be conceived without original sin, so no stain would touch her in any way, shape, manner, or form, so that the flesh God took from her would be perfect, flawless, absolutely pure. And that was what he was going to use to redeem us. Now, if you really stop to think of it, Mary and Jesus must have been the spitting image of each other. I mean, I hate to use the word spitting, but they must have looked exactly alike. And you know why? Because there was no other genetic element at all other than from Mary. So Mary and Jesus, can you imagine how much they must have looked alike? In fact, there are some writings in the old times, in the very early days of the church, and they were writing about how Mary would walk in. And there was a statement by one of the old scriptures that the church did not accept as inspired. And the person wrote this: if we did not know that Mary was the human mother of God, when she walked into a room, we would adore her as God. That's how beautiful and perfect Mary was. And there are many things like this that were written in the times of Jesus and shortly after his death about the Blessed Virgin Mary. But Mary enters into every single person's life. I know she entered into mine. Now, I'm going to tell you about, I had a conversion, and I went and I did a lot of stuff. I went and I sinned, and I enjoyed every sin I ever committed. You're stupid if you don't enjoy sin. Why would you sin if you weren't enjoying it? So, I tell you, I sinned, and I enjoyed every sin I've committed. And when I left, I originally wanted to become a priest. I always wanted to become a priest. There was never a time in my life when I didn't want to be a priest. From the first time I was ever carried into a church, and I was only so many months old, I remember what was going on, and that's what I wanted all my life. I didn't know what it was when I was a baby, but I knew that's what it was. And I remember as I grew up, I wanted only one thing: a priest suit. Now, a priest suit, my mother couldn't understand me because I was so little, she didn't know what I was talking about, so she got me a tank, and she bought me all the other junk that kids get. And I was not interested. I played with my tanks. I played cops and robbers and Indians and cowboys and all those things that kids played back in the Middle Ages. But one of the things that she couldn't understand is what was a priest suit. And it wasn't until I was very disappointed, and it wasn't until the next year that I could truly formulate the words, and I wanted a priest suit. In other words, I wanted a cassock, I wanted a beretta, and I wanted to be able to celebrate Mass. And I was only this big. And so she had no clue where she's going to get a priest suit ever. So she just didn't bother with it for another year. And another Christmas came and went, and even Santa looked at me like I was a lunatic. So the next year, I found a priest suit. It was in a little tiny journal that they gave us in school. It was a little Catholic thing, storybook. And I saw on the back, they advertised you can get a chasuble, you can get a cassock, you can get a beretta, a stole, even a maniple. And it was all made out of plastic with a little fringe and a big red cross in the middle of it. And the cassock was very, very well made, very beautiful. And so was the beretta. And I put that and I said, this is what I want for Christmas. So my mother, as a good mother does, went and got it. And I was ecstatic on Christmas Day. I was ecstatic. My sister, not so much. Because my sister was a year older than me. And my mother thought it would be cute to have a nun and a priest for children. So you should see the picture. I'm like in seventh heaven. My eyes are way off someplace, and I'm holding a crucifix, and I've got my beretta on, and my cassock, and my crucifix. And my sister's sitting there in her nun's outfit. She looked great, but she was not a happy camper. She was like, because she had to smile. So I wore that, and I celebrated Mass constantly. Well, the nuns made the big mistake of showing us the reel-to-reel, Dominic Savio, a movie about Dominic Savio. And I don't know if you know about Dominic Savio. He was a young saint, and he was in the seminary at a very young age, and he had a priest suit. He was wearing a priest suit just like mine. And he had a crucifix just like mine. It's just glorious. And here I'm watching this, and in Dominic Savio's days, they had gangs, just like we did. And the gangs would fight in Italy. And Dominic Savio, one day, he saw the two gangs coming. And it was a very dramatic scene. It was glorious. And there comes one gang, and there comes another, and you can hear the drums in the background. It was just all theater, but it was still glorious. And here comes Dominic Savio, and he's wearing his priest suit, his cassock, and he's got his crucifix. And he takes this beautiful crucifix, and just before these two gangs begin to fight, he stands in the middle of them. And he raises up the crucifix and he says, "Stop in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Can't you see you are crucifying him?" And they stopped. And they looked up at the crucifix. They looked at Dominic Savio. They looked at each other. And they extended the hand of peace and never fought again. Now, this was a great story, but not for me. Because we had gangs that fought in our alley. We had the biggest garage in the block because it was a stable during the Civil War. And so they loved to fight. The gangs used to come and they used to fight in the back of our garage because you could stay in the shade over there. And so I'm upstairs wearing my priest suit, and all of a sudden I see from the third story, I see the gang coming from up the T intersection of the alley. And I see the other gang coming. This was glorious. The movie, St. Dominic Savio. So I went and I grabbed my mother's crucifix because I needed a bigger one. And I grabbed it off the wall of the bedroom and I ran down the stairs and I put my beretta on and I ran down the stairs and I waited. I waited in the shadows of the big garage, the barn, the stable. And I waited there. And I waited and it was just like the movie. Just like the movie. There I was, Dominic Savio. I was going to stop this warring and this fighting. And so I took the crucifix and just before they started to rumble, I ran out and I said, "Stop, Jesus doesn't want you to do this." And it was just like the movie. They looked at the crucifix. They looked at each other. They looked at me. They looked at each other. And then they beat the crap out of me. They beat the boogers out of me, and I never found that cassock nor the beretta. They ripped it off of me. My mother came running down the stairs. My mother, whenever she'd get angry, she would see double, so you got to get out of her way. She could take on both gangs and beat them. But the interesting thing, they never fought in that alley again. But it wasn't because of me, it was because they were scared to death of my mom. I'm telling you, she sees double. You're going to get an iron in your face, you know. So it taught me a lesson. Prudence. prudence in everything you do. You got to be careful. But that didn't stifle my desire to be a priest. I didn't have my priesthood anymore, but it didn't mean that I didn't want to be a priest. I still celebrated Mass. I had little shrines all over the yard. I did everything. And I started making friends with the nuns in the school. Little Sister Imelda and Sister Bartholomew. They were worker nuns in the bottom of the convent. They never went upstairs. They'd only eat the scraps from the table, and they were servants. But I loved those nuns. One of them had Coke bottom bottle glasses. It's so thick, her eyeballs, her pupils were like this big. And you'd look at her and you'd wonder how she can see through these things. But they were the sweetest little nuns. And I used to go there and spend my lunch hours with them and all my recesses with them. And they would feed me. I was in a poor family. So they would feed me something for taking out the garbage every day. And I fell in love with the sisters. And I think my vocation began to increase there. So by the time I got to high school, I wanted to go to St. Francis de Sales, a high school seminary. And I went there and I studied like crazy. Now, something you don't know, I'm dyslexic, and I didn't know that. Nobody knew what dyslexia was back then when I was in high school. I only found out about 10 years ago that I was dyslexic. I just thought I was dumb. I thought I was a little slow. And so did the school. So they were always threatening to put me in a special class because I couldn't do numbers. No matter what they did, I could see what they were telling me. I understood what they were telling me, but my results were always wrong because I kept switching letters and numbers. And the same thing with diagramming sentences. What a waste of time. But anyway, I refused to diagram sentences because I always switch the words around because that's the way I see things. Well, I went to the seminary and I studied and studied and studied. I didn't go to the seminary, but I studied to go there and take a test. So I did take the test, and I passed. Now, this was a miracle, because I was a D student. And I passed, and they asked me, they had an interview, they said, well, you made it by that hair on your chin. And they started interviewing, and they says, well, tell us about your family. And I said, well, my mother and father are separated. And he said, whoa, back up. Wait a second, they're separated. What do you mean by separated? And I said, well, I brought the priest in when I was around 10 years old because my father was not doing and living the way he should, and he was dangerous, and I saw my mother, in a terrible situation. And so I brought the priest, and he recommended that they separate. And the priest looked at me and they said, I'm sorry, but that's an impediment to the priesthood. You can't be a priest if you come from a broken home. And I said, are you serious? And I'm the one who got them to separate. And I thought, what in heavens am I going to do? I said, here I am, all my life, I've never wanted anything else, ever. And so what happens is they tell me that I can't be a priest. Well, this was at St. Francis de Sales Seminary, and we lived way, way on the east side. And it was about a 5-6 mile walk. And I decided to walk home, and it was a beautiful walk by the lake, and shed some tears. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, what can I do? What can I do? I've never wanted anything else. What am I going to become? What am I going to do? And then it hit me. Showbiz! Well, my hero was Bishop Sheen. He was really a scary looking guy. He had these little beady eyes that were real close together. But I really loved Bishop Sheen. I mean, I couldn't get enough of him. And I wanted to watch him every single time he was on television. And it's interesting, as a child, tiny child, I could understand what he was talking about. And that was the beautiful thing. And some of the programs I saw when I was a child, I still remember as though it were yesterday. And so I went and I became an actor. First time I ever got on stage, I do believe I peed my pants. Because, and you may think this strange, but I am an extraordinarily shy and introverted person. Yeah. You want to make something of it? No, I am a very shy and introverted person. I was so introverted, I used to go home from school in the alleys. I never had any friends. I was very quiet. And for me, it was painful. I knew that that's what I needed to do. If I was going to ever get up on a pulpit, I thought, well, if I can't get up on a pulpit, I've got to get up on a stage. And so I did. I auditioned. When I had to wait till I got to high school. And I auditioned, and I got the leading role in every single thing I tried after that. And I forced myself to kind of come out of that shell, that introversion. I'm still very introverted. You take the collar off of me and you put me in a place where I don't know anybody and you wouldn't even know I was in the room, because I'm not that outgoing. When I'm in my collar, I'll talk to anybody at any time, everywhere. But when I'm not in my collar, I'm very, very shy and introverted. So now I went into show business and I left for Hollywood. I hitchhiked across the country. I started working in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, all across the country. And I also walked away from the faith, not deliberately, but I went to one different religion after another just to see what they were like. And I have to say, I went into about 5, 6 different religions, not becoming them, just went in to help them, to see what they were like and to meet the people. And because I was doing pretty good in show business. And I would help them build a school, I would do something, and almost every single time they found out that I was Catholic, they attacked me. Every single time they found out I was Catholic, that's all I heard was these horrible things and stories about Catholics that I knew wasn't true. I never heard these things. These things never happened. These things weren't true. I knew they were lies. And I went from one to another, and every single time they found out that I was Catholic, they ran out into the middle of the sanctuary, and I threw myself down before the Blessed Sacrament. And I prayed. Half of it was showbiz. The other half was real prayer. And all of a sudden, I heard these footsteps come up closer and closer. And all of a sudden, a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around, and there's this little Filipino priest. I mean, I could have sneezed and blown him right out the window. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And I says, "Well, I was in there cleaning." He says, "The church closed at 5 o'clock and it's almost midnight. How did you get in here?" I says, "Well, a little Italian lady, Anna Zumbo let you in?" I said, "Yeah, but it was early this morning. You've been here all day. Come here. You've got to leave right now. You have no right to be in this church." And he's this little puny guy. And so look at me. And he's just telling me off. Well, I followed him. I went to that back door and I figured, I've got to get out of here before he sees all the loot. So as soon as he opened the door, I ran like crazy. Well, I found a priest the next day, and I went to confession. And I tried everything I could to try to get over to that church. Finally, I made it. And I walked in when there was nobody there. I wanted to see that statue again. And so I walked in, and there I opened the door, and there's that little priest standing right in front of that statue, looking right into the eyes of the Blessed Mother. And all of a sudden he goes, and he turns, and he looks at me, and he says, "You!" And I turned and I ran smack into the door, crawling through the door to try to get out. He said, No, stay here, don't, where are you going? Please stay, don't go. Well, he became my spiritual director. But you want to know something amazing? When I was a very tiny child, on the day I was ordained to the diaconate, I went to my mother and I said, "Mom, I want to give myself completely to Mary, and I want you to give me that permission. I want her to be my mother." And she handed me a booklet, and she says, "It's already been done." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When you were a baby, you were dying. The doctors didn't give you any hope. They told you to pack you in ice because your fever was too high. They sent you home from the hospital and said, let him die at home." And I had this Father Mateo's holy hour of a mother at the bedside of her dying child. And I prayed this, and in this holy hour, I gave you completely to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through Mary. I withdrew all of my rights over you, including if God wanted to take your life right then and there, I would completely be 100% in agreement. That's what kind of holy hour it was. Well, she had consecrated me to the Blessed Mother. But the amazing story is this. About 4 weeks after my conversion, I was with Father Hodgson when, that's his name, the Filipino priest. And they finally got the brand new hands from Fatima. They were carved. And he said, "Let us all pray for the benefactor who had these hands made for this statue. Let us pray for Jan Lidke." And I went, "Jan Lidke?" She says, "Yes, Jan Lidke." I says, That's my mother? No, she can't be your mother. She's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's my mother. Jan Litke is my mother. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There is no other Jan Litke. My mother was buying the hands for that statue. She'd never been in San Francisco. She'd never been out of Milwaukee. She had no idea what place on the planet I was in. And yet she was buying the buying the hands for the statue in front of which I was converted. And she was the one who consecrated me to Mary. Now you have to understand something, that if you give your children to the Blessed Mother, she will track them down like a junkyard dog. She will not let them go. I had no idea that I was consecrated to the Blessed Mother. I had no idea. My mother had never told me. In fact, she was afraid of that consecration and only told me when I was ordained to the diaconate, which was 8 years after my conversion in front of that statue. You see, the Blessed Mother is truly a mother. If you give your children, if you give your grandchildren, if you give your spouse completely to Mary, completely, lock, stock, and barrel, to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through Mary, she will take them and she will get them to heaven. I'm a priest to spite me, not because of me. I'm not a priest because I was wonderful and good and holy. As I said, I sinned and I enjoyed every sin I ever committed. But it's because Mary entered into my life without my knowledge. My mother brought Mary into my life. And you know, it amazed me when she told me that, because she never clued me in. Never. Only when I was a deacon did I find out that I belonged to Mary from the time I was a child. And Mary had always been there for me. Not because I was good, not because I was perfect, but because she took me to herself, to her own, as her son. If you have a child, give your child to the Blessed Mother, and I promise you that child will get to heaven. Give whoever it is to Mary, and Mary will take that seriously. And I'm a perfect example of it. I would never be a priest if it wasn't for Mary. I couldn't be. Because if she wouldn't have tracked me down those 14 times and drawn me into that church and then gave me an ultimatum, I'm not saying it was her, but that ultimatum in my head made perfect sense. She wasn't going to keep calling me if I kept walking away. And so that's why I'm here now. So Mary is absolutely essential in the spiritual life. She's not only the pinnacle of creation, but she's our mom. That's the beautiful thing about it. She's our mother. How are you ever going to find out about someone unless you go to their mom? I mean, those of you who were getting married years ago, you know what you did. You went to the kid's mom. And she pulled out the naked baby pictures, and she told you all the stuff that you shouldn't feed him at night, especially sauerkraut and beans. And she told you what he loved. She gave you the little special recipe that just made him so happy, because he remembered it when he was a little child. And she enabled you to love her son in a way that no one else could. That's exactly what Mary does. She enables us to love Jesus with her heart. So never be afraid. Never be afraid. Never give up on your kids either, because it is never too late. It just isn't. No matter how rotten they are. And some kids can be pretty rotten. Some kids you may think they'll never come around. And by the way, don't ever tell Jesus how to do it. He doesn't need your advice. Don't tell him, oh, make him come to church this for Christmas. Make him do this, make him do that. And I say, no, don't do that. Don't tell the Lord what to do. He knows what to do much better than what you can say. Let him do his work. Give him over to Mary, and she will take care of him. She will lead your child to God. That's all you got to do. It's a lot simpler than you think. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? Yeah?